I don't know whether he's in the room. Andrei Nabergoy, have we got you in our presence and vice versa? Please bear with us another couple of minutes while I see if we're ready to begin. And I thank Blitz Strategic Forum for the opportunity to be in the company of such distinguished panelists. And I'd like to congratulate Ms. Mojgan on the organization of this event, which has been just brilliant to date. And I hope you're enjoying it and will continue to enjoy it today. The event this morning is brought to you by Telekom Slovenia, which is one of the biggest telecommunications groups in the region and is represented by Mr. Zoran Vekovar here at my right. We will kick off this morning by introductory presentations of about 5 to 7 minutes each of us. We will be kindly reminded, I am told, by a gong at 5 minutes, and perhaps a little more aggressively so at 7 minutes, so that we shall stick to time. After which discussion is invited amongst ourselves, but most importantly with yourselves, hopefully. I would like to present our panelists here today. Mr. Zoran Vekovar is member of the Management Board of Telekom Slovenia Group. He's been at the foreground of telecommunications technology implementation in Slovenia. His tenure as CTO of Telekom Slovenia was preceded by 14 years at Slovenia's biggest mobile telecom operator, Mobitel, where he was responsible for the introduction of new technologies. Please welcome Mr. Vekovar.
Thank you. Please allow me, dear ladies and gentlemen, to start with 3 topics I think worth mentioning. The first is, of course, infrastructure. I'm a CTO of Telecom, so so infrastructure is my main task to be provided. Then technology development, and the third is the view of ISP. Of course, Telecom is a big regional ISP. The view of ISP to further development of Internet. So access and distribution. The access to the Internet has become a commodity, actually. It doesn't matter where you are or when. It's natural that we all see the access as something normal, something natural. But we do not pose actually the question, is that everything so easy? Do we have any open issues on in these terms? So, for instance, 30% of population in Slovenia still can't access internet because Slovenia is a big portion of population is sparse, lives in sparsely populated areas, and of course it's not an easy task to provide an access to them. Those live in urban environment, of course they all have the bunch of different technologies, different providers to select from, cable networks, FTTH, which is Slovenia is in the 2nd position in Europe in terms of FTTH, so fiber to the home penetration. Of course, there are mobile networks as well, mobile broadband. So it's a bunch of technologies which the user can select. On the other terms, on the other hands, in rurals, there's actually nothing to be selected. Users, they don't have an option to select, so I think we have to tackle this issue, how to provide internet access to remaining 30% of population as well. There is formula, it seems it may work, which is the combination of more efficient use of existing copper infrastructure, then wireless technologies, and the combination of private and public fundings. The second question is technology, of course. How this technology will continue. Actually, the technology seems is not a major question anymore. The major question is how to find positive business cases to continue investing into those technologies. It's quite clear that two technologies will prevail on long term. And the first is fiber network infrastructure, of course, and the second are mobile broadband. Third generation, fourth generation is forthcoming, LTE, but we have to tackle this issue, how to provide positive business cases for that, because it's not easy to survive. There's just a thin margin on broadband services even today, even on XDSL, so on old legacy copper networks, we have very low margin to survive. So how to survive, how to continue investing into this area, because traditional operators, of course, will live on access. We are trying to count on value-added services as well. We are on the 4th position in IPTV here in Slovenia in terms of penetration in Europe. But of course, this eats more and more capacity. How we can survive that? So this was a very short introduction.
Thank you very much for your perspective, Mr. Vekova. Prior to introducing the rest of their panelists and their thesis this morning, I'd like to put our discussion into a bit of context, if you'll allow me. And it is clearly about the internet and how the internet changed and continues to change the world, as you might have read in the introductory booklet. Now, talking about the internet today seems a little bit like talking about the car engine when it was invented. It's so ubiquitous, it's becoming and has become an everyday commodity. When a car engine was invented in its early days, there was certainly much discussion about it, and there was discussion, for example, about how it facilitates life, how it enables and makes travel easier. The engine was a democratizing force. It made travel accessible to the masses. It made the world different that way. However, when it was invented, and in its early days, in its first 5, 10, 15 years, what perhaps was not so explicitly discussed was that the car would change the geographical landscape we live in, would change our environment, and perhaps most importantly, would determine the geopolitical balance of power in the world today. The fuel that runs engines fundamentally influences the balance of power in the world. And it just goes to show that in terms of contemporary discussion of technological innovation, what's often overestimated is the short-term effect, and what's often underestimated are the long-term implications of technological change. And I think the same might be said about the internet. When the internet started to become mainstream, a lot was said about the extinction of books, the extinction of tape, or even the extinction of poetry. We now all know that that wasn't the case. However, very little was said about the social implications of the internet. The internet has changed the world in a way that it's become a democratizing force. It makes knowledge accessible to the masses, and therefore influences power in a significant way. It has shifted the balance of power. It has enabled unimaginable access to information sources at the proverbial click of a button. And by making knowledge so universally accessible, by making it so systematically sorted, such as Google has done,
Thank you very much, Katarina. Thanks for having me here. I'm honored to have the opportunity to address this distinguished forum and to have the opportunity to express the views in relation to the internet and the topic you've chosen for today, which I think it's excellent. And it says the internet does change everything, but my view is that it changes, but not everything. And I would like to touch upon several issues that I find of extreme importance when we talk about internet. I will not talk about industry and infrastructure as such. I would like to raise the issue of freedoms. It is connected to the job I do at the moment, which is actually monitoring media freedom in all 56 participating states of the OSCE as the only intergovernmental media watchdog in the world. Freedoms that I would like to discuss today are freedoms that represent our common values: freedom of speech, freedom of expression, free flow of information, freedom to access, freedom to connect. And all those freedoms in the new era, in the era of internet, are under threat. Why do I say so? It's simply because what I've seen in the past 4 months within the OSCE region, and as Katarina pointed rightly, the region goes from Vancouver via Washington to Vladivostok, so it's a huge part of our planet. The situation is not rosy. The problem we are facing, and you mentioned it, is also the infrastructure, in a way that there are still parts of the world when there is no telecommunication infrastructure. So we cannot even talk and discuss penetration of the internet in certain countries. And then there are some countries that are rapidly moving towards new technologies and internetization and digitalization. But what the governments are trying to do is to suppress and restrict these freedoms. They are using all possible tools to do that, all possible explanations. And the moment they realize that they have possibility to block and to restrict, they try to do that simply because, in my view, that represents unstable governments, the governments that are fearing censorship, bad governance, corruption, and all those issues that can be seen on the internet. There is also another level of suppression and restriction when we talk about internet, and that is a satire and criticism that in many countries is seen as something that should be blocked. There are bloggers in prisons and people that are trying to express their views on the internet. Pardon me. So all those issues are actually representing a huge threat when we discuss internet. How to overcome this era of secrecy in order to have societies that are more free and more stable is not an easy thing. I'm not talking about ideal world, I'm talking about real world. And needless to say that there are issues that needs to be tackled, like the issue of child abuse and exploitation, terrorism, privacy that was mentioned, data protection, all the issues, human trafficking as well, but all those issues should be tackled by legal procedures, necessary and needed as they are, but not more than it's allowed in a democratic society. The issue that I would also like to raise today is the issue of introduction of the new laws on terrorism, so-called laws on terrorism, that in many ways and in many countries are just an excuse in order to suppress and to block the internet for their citizens. When I say so, I say because we did a legal assessments of certain laws that are really vague and that are adopted overnight without any public consultations. And all those issues represent a huge threat to the internet and benefits of the internet. So what I would like to see, at least at the end of my mandate, as the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, is less fear when we talk about internet, and more to concentrate on bringing people together, connecting people, building infrastructures, working together with the industry in order to offer possibilities for our citizens. I would end here, and then I will be very happy to engage in conversation later on. Thank you very much.
For your introduction. Thank you very much for your reminder and your participation. I hope it will be just as strong in further discussion. Thank you. I am loud, but not that loud. From the top, Dr. Turk is professor and chair of construction informatics at the Faculty of Civil and Geodetic Engineering at the University of Ljubljana and secretary general of the Reflection Group of the Future of Europe. He was also a founding editor of Slovenia's primetime IT publication way back in 1984. Dr. Turk was the Slovenian Minister for Growth from 2007 to 2008 and has, as was already said, an internet pioneer in Slovenia from the very beginnings. Please welcome Dr. Turk.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. The title of this panel leaves no question. It's very clear that internet does change everything. But if everything is being changed, then my question that I would like to propose an answer to is, if we are going through all this change, how will cities, how will countries, how will civilizations, how will continents react to these changes? Will they be the winners or will they be the losers? And I will begin my brief introduction by asking this question: why was Europe, European civilization, so successful in the past? And my answer will be, it was because it embraced communication revolutions in the past. It embraced its ability that these changes in communication, that they liberate, that they disrupt, and that they are, as our moderator said, they are a social equalizer. I will say briefly a few words about the dangers that I see in the future development of web technology and the internet as this disruptive social equalizer that it happens, and I will conclude that European values were instrumental to the empowerment through the IT in the past, and that we should be returning, remembering those values if we want to be successful in this era of internet changing everything in the future. This question, why some civilizations are successful and why some are not, was asked by the Pulitzer Prize winner Jared Diamond in his book for which he got the Pulitzer Prize, Guns, Germs and Steel. And his answer to this question was, well, this was because in this fertile crescent there were very suitable plants and animals for domestication. And it was this head start that happened 10,000 years ago that actually made the Mediterranean or Eurasian continent as the best place, as the cradle of civilization. But this was 10,000 years ago. And by the Middle Ages, most of Eurasia had access to these plants and animals. And the question still remains, why after the Middle Ages a few countries in Europe took the lead? And the answer, my answer is because internet changes everything, or because communication changes everything. Those of you who have listened to me in the past know that I'm fascinated by this fact that Hagia Sophia in Istanbul has been the largest building in the world for 1,000 years. And then very suddenly, around 1500, all kinds of bigger structures, including St. Peter's in Rome, appeared. And of course, the interesting question is, what happened during that time? And what happened is we made a transition, a revolution, a change of everything with the introduction of different communication technology. Communication technology built around paper, built around a technology that was invented in China. Paper became available for everything, not just for copying the Bible and a few thinkers from the ancient times. It was available for Galileo's drawings, for engineering drawings. etc., etc. It was available to spread the Reformation movement, the Gutenberg Bible, etc., etc. So paper changed everything. And around paper, a lot of communication technologies, primitive, of course, were built. And communication is an essential ingredient in how you make a society. You make a family, a personal relation by communicating. You make a business by communicating. You make a company by communicating. And you make a society, a state, a European Union or United Nations by communicating. But the fact remains that a change in communication changes everything somewhere. It changes something everywhere, but it does not change everything everywhere. Now, why is that? I think this is an interesting question, because paper was known to the whole Eurasian continent, including some parts of Africa. It was known to the Chinese, it was known to the Indians, the Persians, the Arabs, the Turks, why Europe took the lead 500 years ago, and we are still enjoying the benefits of that lead. I think we have to look a little bit deeper into what is happening with communicating. Expensive writing media was available for millennia, and it was restricted to the ruling classes of those societies. Cheap paper brought knowledge, communication to many more people. To do what? To allow more people to read and write, to allow more people to learn, to allow more people to raise above their destiny, to raise above their inheritance, to raise above the family in which they were born. And out of all these major European or Eurasian civilizations I listed, from Japan to China, India, etc., the European one, even 500 years ago, was the most respectful for the individual. It was still the most meritocratic, meaning people can step out of their destiny. It was not locked into respect for the elderly, like one could say the Chinese civilization. It was not locked into the caste system of India. It was not locked into the belief that humans are powerless and everything is God's responsibility. And of course, the Reformation movement of Martin Luther helped a big deal during that time. So the European civilization was the most liberal or libertarian one. It let new technologies to empower the individual. It gave him more intellectual, economic, political freedom than other places in the world. And that made Europe 500 years ago the most creative and innovative area on the planet. So paper was this first communication revolution. Digital communication is the second. And the point is, communication revolutions, they liberate, they disrupt, and they are a social equalizer. Now, I could go on. I hear the noise, the sound, that I should quickly wrap this up. I think that the disruptive power of IT as a social equalizer is endangered at this time or in the recent years. I'm not a socialist, but we need to make the best use of the brains that exist in a society if we want a rich society. And we are seeing a trend where, for example, you have increasingly expensive devices versus cheap devices. You can get a net we used to have web that was freely available for all. If you were cheap, if you were poor, if you were from Kenya, or if you were from Luxembourg, you would have access to the same web pages. Most of information was free, etc. The web is now kind of moving into this app area which is advertised like thanks a billion, like a billion apps, but think more of $1 billion. And we have the issue of net neutrality, where some people are trying to carve this superhighway so that the driving on this highway would be more expensive if you carry an expensive load. So in conclusion, in the past, Europe has been the best ecosystem to embrace the paper communication revolution, and it embraced it as a social equalizer to allow people to empower. It allowed this technology to empower the populations. And where are we in Europe with the digital communication revolution? The fact is that never before people had access to so much information, to so much processing power, to so many other smart people to work with. Never before such a small percentage of innovators worked for your company. Never before such a small percentage of intellectuals work at universities, and never before such a small percentage of writers work for the publishers. The fact is there are a few government people in this room. Never before such a small percentage of people worked inside the government. Most of the smart people are not working in the government anymore. 200 years ago, most of the smart people worked in the army or in the church or in the government. But never before the government controlled so many aspects of our life as they do today, and in Europe in particular. In Europe in particular. So empowering is the key, and I like to quote Bill Gates in this aspect, as he said, as we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those that empower others. And I think we have to return to those values that empower. We will not have the quantity of people in Europe or in the West. Everybody knows that it's important to invest in research, technology, education, etc., etc. But we have a culture, tradition, and values that have been empowering people in the past, and we have to return to those. Respect for the individual, respect for freedom, including freedom of the press, movement of ideas, meritocracy, democracy, and the rule of law. These values empower, and they empower even more when there are new disruptive information technologies. The reflection group that you mentioned made a very clear conclusion. It made a whole chapter on the issue. I don't have time to go into the details of this, maybe later. The title of the chapter was Growth Through Knowledge, Empowering the Individual. I think this is the key message that the politicians have to take from this disruption.
Somehow they're striking on us, and they would like us for us to be interactive within these microphones. Thank you very much. Thank you for putting our discussion in the Darwinian context of adaptation and blending that with respect. I think that's a combination that we'll have much to discuss around. I also am delighted to note that of all of us here today, you've adapted to change most quickly. We're still on paper while you're on the iPad, so congratulations on that. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jozef Györkös, State Secretary at the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology of the Republic of Slovenia. Dr. Györkös was formerly State Secretary at the Ministry of Information Society. He was involved in preparing and implementing the policies for the development of information society services in Slovenia, and has published a number of papers on the subject of information society and media convergence. He is also full professor at the Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science in Maribor, Slovenia. Dr. Györkös, the floor is yours. Please welcome him.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for organizers to inviting me. Let me start as a professor and not a state secretary. Maybe if we are going now back to the history, there are also two periods that should be mentioned, maybe, and they are related to the internet, because it is a very broad audience. Maybe it is of some value that we notice that the internet as a protocol started in mid-60s, and the World Wide Web as a service platform started not later than 20 years ago. And Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who was one of the keynote speakers at Internet Governance Forum in Sharm el-Sheikh a year ago, he said that so back in 1989 there was no World Wide Web, but we had all the pieces. And I think that in some kind we have again today all the pieces for something that is called innovative society. And the information society infrastructure, the ICT, becomes, I don't know if we want to hear that, the engineers actually, it becomes an infrastructure that is needed for also other social and economical processes. And I'd like to say a few words about Slovenia and the information society, just to notice that, of course, we have here some of the pioneers also in the audience and on the stage of the internet, and everything started with different institutions, with subcultural groups, with BBS communities, with first computing journals, as we heard, and by enthusiasts. And the policy aspect started in early 90s. It was the Slovenian Society of Informatics. It was a group of people who heard about the Bangeman report and what should be done that we can move towards the information society. And one of the issues was, of course, to liberalize the telecommunications. And then we harmonized the policy level just before we joined the EU, being quite active in different forums, World Summit on Information Society, IGF, and so on. And then we had this Ministry of Information Society, but today it does not exist in government. Today the Information Society issues are under the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology. So it was also the time, I think the late 90s, but Mr. Nabergo can tell us about this, the burst of .com economy, and the spreading of internet was quite clear at this area. We had some latency, and I'd like to challenge the representative from Telecom why it was the case. But the center of my discussion is the digital agenda. Actually, the new strategy of Europe. Europe means also Slovenia. We are taking part of it in it, and maybe it can be good to stress these 7 issues which are building the new digital agenda. First is the creating of the digital single market. It is about copyrights, payments, e-signatures, and so on. The second, improving the framework and condition for interoperability. We have still some very serious borders within the state, also at the level of the applications in information technology, the governmental applications. Third is boosting internet trust and security. We heard about this already. We are quite active in rapid response systems on cyber attacks, working in ESA and so on. Fourth issue is guaranteeing the provision of much faster internet access. And Mr. Vehovar started with the challenges of Slovenia. Of course, we have a big competition in urban areas and no competition at all in rural areas. There are some expectations from the digital dividend when we move from digital broadcasting to analog, but I think these expectations are too high. We can discuss this maybe later. The fifth is encouraging investments in research and development. I think that Mr. Kennedy has this topic. The sixth is enhancing digital literacy skills and inclusion. Namely, 30% of Europeans never used the internet still, so much about changing everything. And 7, applying ICT to address social changes such as climate change, rising healthcare costs, and aging populations. So my vision or statement, response to the challenge of internet changes everything is, yes, if everything means access to knowledge, influence, participation, and internet, of course, can contribute to the critical judgment. And of course, with careful approach to the digital divide, it gives an opportunity to live better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jurkes. I am still optimistic and a believer that we have some very smart people in government in Europe and worldwide today, and thank you for confirming that for us here. Further on, I'd like to introduce David Kennedy, Director of Euroscom, the European Institute for Research and Strategic Studies in Telecommunications, the leading private organization for collaborative research and development in European telecommunications. Mr. Kennedy has many years of professional experience in research and development, and he hails from Ireland. Please welcome David Kennedy.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And as already mentioned, I have an R&D background because I've been working together with an industry group for the past couple of years to try and kick off a new research program within the European Union framework on the future internet. We've succeeded to the extent of the first phase is now starting, and while we haven't quite reached the billion investment in this, we're talking about $500 million or so in the next 3 years on the future internet issues. Now, in the discussion about does the internet change things, I actually really had a problem with that heading because I could put that sentence in the past tense. It has changed everything and it will change everything. So no matter what way we look at this is a dynamic period of change. In the context of the social side, well, actually, we're seeing some very interesting developments and emerging ideas across Europe. In Finland, they have recently declared internet access as a right. So it's a right of an individual to have internet access. In that context, they have identified it as one of the basic things that allows people to be a full participant in society. In some of the other countries, they're busy working on legislation, France, the UK, and that if you're 3 times caught downloading an MP3 file without correct copyright authority, you could be banned from the internet. And again, this is a conflict between using the internet as the enabler for an advanced network society and sort of reprimanding somebody for stealing candies from the store. We have to get this balance right. So that means there must be a total refresh on the way we approach the internet, how we manage it, how we authenticate people, how we deal with identities. And this is a new concept because the internet at the moment has evolved from a sort of paradise of uncontrolled activities and unidentified scenarios and anonymous people and so on. And it's moving into a domain where we want to use it for active societal life, and this brings the responsibilities of controlling many of these items. And this is where we get into the wonderful arguments. Who has the right to control what? Who looks after what? And so on. In the research domain, where we have to talk about what things are needed in order to make the internet grow and develop, and in order to make the business that can exploit the internet grow and develop. And there's lots of issues, thousands of issues. Many of them have to do with the basic principles of openness and interworking, as just mentioned. Openness and interworking can mean that somebody who does a development here in Slovenia has the ability to sell that quality, that value that they've added on a global market. And this is one of the key aspects of the new internet, that no longer are you limited to, and I think the evolutions and some of the historical points that were made, how society evolved. One of the things was that previously in many other generations, the effectiveness was how far you could travel in a day by walking, then by horse, then by car, then by plane. Now the information in the internet domain, it can get around the world before you finish typing it, so it's a totally different context. In that, we now have to look at some of the business models, and we have a real problem here, because in the current internet, many of the business models are critically flawed. They will not work. How many of you have internet access at home? I presume quite a lot. How many flat rate internet access? Yeah, quite a lot, again. And this is one of the problems, because unfortunately our colleague in the infrastructure provider, he's not getting more money as you demand more and more capacity through your flat rate access. And this is, again, a problem, because he's having to provide bigger and bigger infrastructure to satisfy your demands, but he's not getting paid for it. So we have a mismatch here somewhere. An interesting thing in the history of the internet, in the evolutions we've had, the PC revolution, the software, so on, the web, and so on, and now we have the services coming along, it's never been the same company twice. It was IBM in the PCs, it was Microsoft in the operating system, it was the browser wars and so on. And now it's Google and this. Always new companies come along. One of the things we actually should be looking at is how can we stimulate the new companies? I think you'll have to answer that one. But how can they be in partnership with the infrastructure guys so that they can get big fast and actually support a global market from a relatively small start? And that's where you possibly need a new business model, which is a partnership between the infrastructure and the service providers. One of the issues, please keep it in mind in all the discussions about the societal thing as well. What is the sustainable model? If it doesn't work, should the government have more responsibility? In order to get all the people in the mountains and in the wild regions, do they have to support some of the rollouts to make sure it's sustainable? the EC perhaps could reflect on some of their policies, because their local loop unbundling has actually caused a delay in the rollout of some advanced high bandwidth technologies, simply because the guys who would do the investment are faced with the fact that they might be forced, from the day they install their new infrastructure, they have to share it with others at regulated rates, and therefore can't get the return on their investment. And if we create regulatory scenarios like this, we will block the advances that were possible with the internet. I mean, the other side of it, we should actually look at the positives that are available from the internet, and we should be very careful that we don't fall into the trap. There are very good organizations that can deal with the issues where it's misused or whatever, but I think for most of us we should look at the positives. They're environmental, they're social, they're economic, and so on. When the Inuit Eskimos in the North Pole got their first telephone line, the first thing they did was rang the fish market in Ontario or somewhere to find out what was the real price of the fish. So the next time the guy came up with the truck to take their fish, he got an education. Understand, information gives power. Information makes the world a fairer place. If I know what my goods are worth on the total market, then I can handle the argument a lot better. So that's one of the brilliant things with it. In terms of societal things, yes, there's going to be a lot of stupid things like the photos from your party when you were a teenager or whatever, that'll still be there. There's no rules for deleting information that you put out in the world. But on the other hand, one of the mistakes we make in these discussions is probably the average age in this room is wrong to discuss some of the future internet applications. Our concepts of privacy in that don't apply to many of the future generations. They're quite happy to tell all the friends where they are, what they're doing, what they're having for breakfast. And we're probably quite cynical and said, no, that'll never work as an application. You know, no one would pay money to tell people such little bits of information. But we've got to learn. So I think take up these ideas, take the positive aspects, the fairness it can bring to society, the inclusion it can support, look at the areas where we need to support, if you like, the evolution, whether it's in infrastructure, whether it's in education, my own favourite, research. Very definitely we need here now to understand that the research domain and the, how will I say, the stimulation of the next generation of exciting things, that's a competitive race now. Europe is into this race. So the regions must have a policy. How do they stimulate the activities? How do they get the next generation taking their wild and weird ideas and turning them into commercial businesses? And that's something we've really got to develop. To close, I just say, think openly about all the new devices and all the new things that can happen. Think about how they can enhance life, improve environment, and if you don't believe it, take it to limited examples. The device for watering your grass could actually provide a good environmental service if it asked the weather office, was it going to rain, before it watered the grass. And such a simple thing saves water and so on. It's dependent on devices being able to communicate, an infrastructure being there, an IT system being in the background to handle millions of little requests, and an intelligent management system and regulation system to handle all this traffic in a global sense. That's what we need to prepare for, and that will enable the future society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. I think we have something to learn from the Alaskans yet. And I would like to introduce Andrej Nabergoj, a Slovenian digital entrepreneur who founded his first company while still a student at the University of Ljubljana, and has subsequently built 4 more businesses, most recently in Silicon Valley. He's also the founder and president of the Young Executive Society for the region. Andrej Nabergoj was also named Young Global Leader at the Davos Forum in 2009. Please welcome Andrej Nabergoj.
Thank you. For those of you who are tweeting, my username is @Andre. By the way, how many of you are tweeting right now? Am I in the wrong panel?
That's how many admit to tweeting right now.
All right. So I'd just like to, ask you a couple more questions about internet literacy. How many of you are on Facebook? Please really raise your hands. Like a handful, I see, like less than a fifth of the audience. How many of you are using Twitter once in a while? Quite a few. How many of you have heard of companies like Foursquare, Zynga, Groupon? A few. So for those of you who have answered no to all of these questions, unfortunately, you are in the endangered species. Yeah, that category. So as my colleague has said previously, internet has changed already everything. It's not something that we should be excited about as a new trend or in technology. It's already the fundamental tissue that binds together commerce, politics, society, education, and I'm extremely excited about the future that internet-enabled technologies are going to bring to our society. What is internet today, and how is it going to change? I think those are how is it going to impact on society in the future. Those are some of the questions that I would like to discuss today. Fundamentally, internet is pretty much a web of links, right? Described by Tim Berners-Lee. And companies like Google have been extremely efficient in organizing this information and gave us access to an unbelievable body of knowledge. Pretty much everything that exists on the planet is now organized based on relevancy by Google. Why is that important? Pretty much because there is so much knowledge in our collective databases of what we've been doing in the past, what we're doing now, and that enabled a lot of businesses. Google is on its own $100+ billion company, like $150 billion company. That is almost 10 times the GDP of Slovenia, a little bit less than that. But like indirectly, Google is empowering many trillions of dollars of exchange worldwide, right? You turn off Google for one day, the world economy is going pretty much like to suffer a big time. So when I talk to governmental leaders and politicians, I think I would always like to ask the question, like, can you explain me, why do you think Google is a $160 billion company? How is it possible that a web page, like a basic web page, a blank white web page, is worth $160 billion? And how is it possible that this web page is making $30–40 billion a year with extremely healthy profits and extremely healthy margins still, right? So how is it possible that these companies that were startups 10 years ago, founded by 2 Stanford grad students, are now some of the most powerful companies in the world? More powerful than Toyota, more powerful than General Electric, more powerful than Deutsche Telekom, more powerful than any other company in the world, right? So we live in an age where these companies are already the core of everything we do, of everything that we live and use. Our existence would be different without these companies that were 10 years ago only startups. So I think we're going to see more of companies like Google emerging in the next decade. And we're going to approach, I think, almost a point in time that some people call synchronicity, where it is impossible to foresee the pace of change for shorter and shorter periods of time. So I think in the next 10 to 20 years, we'll reach a point where it is going to be impossible to tell what the world will look like tomorrow. So I think, so if Google is a database of intentions, and that is what makes it so powerful, it's a database of all your intentions. When you search on Google, you express your intention. You want to travel, you're looking for an information, you're looking for a person, you're looking for a service, you're looking for a product. That is your intentions. And Google is a database of all intentions. Now I will touch very briefly 2 other companies that I think are going to change the internet in a very profound way. One of them is called Facebook, and another one is called Twitter. So let's touch Twitter for a second. Twitter is a company that it's 5 years old. It's a social network, and enabled initially college students to connect and meet each other on college campuses. But very soon, Facebook opened up to enable anyone on the planet to join as a member and fill in his profile data. But very, very fast, Facebook has adopted to the new reality of what they call the real-time web, to share your information about what you are doing, what you're reading, what do you like, and that has transformed Facebook into a database of expressions, like not only intentions but also expressions, like what do you really want to be? What is your online persona, which is becoming increasingly more important, right? So Facebook has so far really impacted like elections around the world, most recently the Obama's campaign. Without Facebook, Obama could not raise almost $1 billion from so-called micro donations. You think about that. For the first time in human history, a president of the most powerful economy in the world was elected by support of people who gave less than $50 each. So he's not now, he doesn't have really this burden of the big corporations who sponsored his campaign. He was sponsored by users, by people. And the average donation was less than $50. Altogether, it was almost $1 billion. Facebook has impacted political campaigns all over the world. It's impacting commerce and economy. And it is going to transform itself from a social network into the most powerful search engine that we've ever seen. I think my prediction for Facebook is that it is going to become the first trillion-dollar company in the next decade. So watch out Facebook closely. If you're not on Facebook, I think you're missing a lot. I mean, what he said before, the notion of privacy is not relevant to the younger generation. And that is also the case to your generation. Like Gmail is the email client from Google. How easy it is for Google to get all your emails and your content that you share in your emails by saying that you have unlimited storage. People, turns out, are very easily to bribe with some simple things like unlimited storage and something like that. And Facebook has proven that there is value in expressing not only your social connections, but connections to things and content. So when you traverse the social graph, and when you traverse what they call interest graph, and when you traverse to what they call the location-based graph, then you can very easily predict the future. So based on what people that you've been hanging out previously, based on your interests in the past, based on your locations, I can very easily tell that you should like these things. That I can very easily tell that you should be going to this event right here, right? Twitter is another company that emerged a couple of years ago from San Francisco. It's a very simple service, pretty much a microblogging service where you can share your status. It can be anything. But when people don't understand the power of Twitter, how is it possible that Twitter can change how political elections turns out around the world? Twitter, for instance, really impacted on the Iranian campaign last year. They don't understand that Twitter collectively is like a human-powered spider. Spider is a term that refers to Google's technology to crawl the World Wide Web and index and organize information around the world. So Twitter is essentially tapping into the human-powered spider, our collective consciousness of what is happening right now, and from that emergence, they can organize information about our world in real time. That is extremely powerful. You can now, search on Twitter. By the way, Twitter is the fastest growing search engine, almost 800% a year. You can search for what is happening right now, anywhere. And that is being done by 100 or so million active Twitter users. So I think we're going to see in the next 10 years, we're going to see like an evolution from, almost like a revolution from where we are in the internet today into almost like an artificial intelligence that will not only help us predict our future, but will lead us to our future for more prosperous times, for better opportunities for people from all over the world. And that, I think, at some point will converge with technologies which I've already seen and tried. In Silicon Valley recently, a friend started a company called Emotive, which is a brain scanner device. So you put it on your brain, and it can read your thoughts. And it works. I've been able to learn 4 or 5 different gestures to express, and the computer could understand what I meant. So altogether, I think it's going to create something that I cannot even imagine and foresee. So thank you very much. I would like to open the floor for questions. Right?
Thank you, Andrei. Our person in Silicon Valley, which, let's not forget, controls 50% of the world's venture capital, which controls a great amount of innovation and what we're seeing on the internet today. So Silicon Valley is still a center of power and a bastion that can either enable or disable access. So that might be an interesting question for the floor as well. I'd like to open the floor for questions immediately and invite your participation. All I ask is that you introduce yourselves. And in my experience, the questions that are the most succinct, brief, and concrete elicit the best answers. So please, in the front row, can we have a microphone, please?
My name is Borka Erman Blažić, representing Internet Society. I agree with most of what has been said about the internet and the changing role of the internet. It's true that the technological advance that was brought by the internet in the last 2 decades is compared to about 20,000 of technological development of the human civilization. And it is also true that the quantity of the stored information in the internet is coming very close to the number of the words ever spoken by the human civilization. And also it's true that the internet empowers citizens and brings a better quality of life, not just communication, through, for example, helping in e-health, healthcare, safer transport, easier communication, easier access to the public services also contribute very much to the optimization of the energy consumption and so on. However, you have to be also aware that internet is changing the world, and maybe you are not always understanding what has been changed in the internet. But at the same time, the internet is changing itself. And here we have to think about how the internet is changed. Is the internet to stay open, neutral, the major issue that contributed to the success of the internet, or is going to be changed? Some of these issues, or some of the policymakers think that can be solved by the regulation and the liberalization of the market and competition, competition of the service providers on the internet and telecommunication markets. We have witnessed big changes in Europe in the last 20 years, the liberalization of the market, the competition of the telecoms. However, most of this competition stays in local boundary, which is also the case with Slovenia. Most of our actors on our telecommunication markets have local, local origin. So this is a very important question from the point of view of the policymakers, as well from the users, because the users are here concerned what kind of information are going to access, what kind of services they are going to pay or to get from the providers and so on. Another big issue is the growth of the internet traffic. The research has shown that the internet traffic is growing by 40 to 50% per year now. And that means that we as technical experts will have to face with the problems that appear in the internet infrastructure. Are we ready to cope with it? Is the current internet infrastructure sufficient, or we need to change it? How to deal with it? Who to be responsible for the change of the internet? If it's at all possible to change the IP networking paradigm. These are big issues, and my colleague David Kennedy spoke about the approach of the European Union regarding these problems. But anyhow, I do believe that we have, all of us, involved in this to contribute also to the real path of the internet evolution. I mean, the internet to preserve the main characteristic that actually contributed to his success. This is openness and neutrality of the network. So I'll finish with this.
There are quite a few inherent questions in there, aren't there? Is there one you'd like to prioritize to one of the panelists? Perhaps Dr. Turk would like to address neutrality that he touched upon in his introductory presentation. Perhaps Mr. Vehovar as regards access and the evolution of protocols, and certainly Mr. Kennedy, perhaps in that order, or is there a particular question that you wanted to address?
I think that one of the most important issues now in the development of the future internet is the preserving of the neutrality and openness. And our colleague from OSCE has mentioned already that some of the countries are blocking, are
Indeed.
filtering the content, and if you want really to use the enable internet to be to empower the users via the internet services, even in the democratic and political processes, we have to provide to them open and correct information. Otherwise, it can turn another way. We have an example in the Second World War. Actually, was initiated
Indeed.
just because of the big propaganda and misusage of the medium. No? And this medium is even more important and more powerful, I would say, than the medium that was used 60 years ago.
Thanks very much. I'd like to kick off with Dr. Turk, also touches on Ms. Mijatovic's field, so let's continue through the panel. Dr.
I think Borka gave rise to a very important issue, and that is that the internet is not just another technology. You mentioned the petrol engine, or one convention, nanotechnologies, etc. These technologies disrupt in a certain niche, a certain small aspect of society. Internet indeed changes everything and makes a lot of people uneasy. In the beginning, they thought, okay, so this is, I mean, kids are playing and etc., etc. But what is internet actually doing? It's disrupting this economical, political, and media ecosystem. It is totally disrupting it, and a lot of people do not like this disruption. They would like things to stay as they were, because in that system they have the power, they have the readers, they have the business model. And I think a big danger for the future of the internet is this alliance of traditional ways of doing politics. I'm not speaking left and right, but I'm speaking about political system as a whole. Media, who will be coming to those politicians saying, look, we have now big losses because of this internet, you have to give us money to survive, because, I mean, we are the cornerstone of democracy, you really cannot do anything without us. And there will be some businesses who will say, oh, we are so poor, we cannot make money, you know, we would like to charge extra for the lorries that carry expensive tourists, or for the buses that, the bus that takes expensive tourists to Bled should pay more at the Dars toll gates than maybe some truck who is carrying bricks. And I think this alliance is dangerous, and against this alliance, somehow the civil society, the smart people will have to organize. I think the resistance is futile, but it will take some time for all these people to learn the lesson the hard way.
Thank you very much for that.
Yes. Yes, I said it many times, even before I became a representative on freedom of the media. It was mainly related to my experience in my home country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and what media did in the former Yugoslavia in order to be instrumental for inciting hatred, ethnic cleansing, and all the horrible events that happened in the former Yugoslavia. But in the internet era, I see something that Borka said, it's repeating. It's also what Vincent Cerf said more than a decade ago, that the internet is actually a double-edged sword. At the same time, you have thoughtful and thoughtless fighting each other. But again, I would always do what Mr. Kennedy said. We should look it from a positive side. We should look the benefits. We should educate our children. We should apply critical thinking instead of blocking, restricting, suppressing. I will mention again these two bloggers that I mentioned, and I will hopefully visit them in 2 weeks. There are two young guys in their 20s sitting in prison in Azerbaijan for just doing a video clip showing their president as a donkey, very satirical, very provocative video clip, but for that they are in the prison 2.5 years. So all those issues are actually showing us that the governments, too many governments, are afraid of internet as a medium. They see it as a threat. They see it as something that should be suppressed and restricted. And that's why I think we should do as much as we can, all of us together, different international organizations, our society, European Union, but we should never forget what is outside European Union, because if we forget it, it will affect our life as well. So in my view, we should do more on, actually our goal should be to maximize media freedom both in a structural, business related issues and senses, and also social, speech related issues.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you. Yes, there's a couple of points in the questions of the moment. I mean, the issue of neutrality in the network. The formal definition of that, it means all bits get treated equally. They get transported by the network from wherever they started to wherever they ended equally. Now, the problem with that as a concept, very simply, is it's very low level and it doesn't actually have any understanding of what those bits are going from A to B for, and could there be some better accommodation done. The simple example, just so people understand, would be if I decide I want to download a movie to watch tomorrow evening, and my colleague beside me decides he wants to have a real-time audio conference to Silicon Valley right now. His bits have a certain value because he's doing a real-time communication, and if the poor wireless LAN in this hotel can't handle both of our transactions at the same time, it doesn't hurt me if it delays me a little. So the service agreement I might have could promise to give me the movie by 9 o'clock in the morning whenever I want to watch it, but the agreement he might have could be that he gets the capacity he needs to have the link now. So we must understand this subtle difference between net neutrality and management within the network, management of the service that's promised to the individuals. So please, when you're having this discussion, keep in mind the difference. The same point will apply to our colleagues from the Slovenian Telecom, in that he's trying to manage a network. A network and infrastructure, no matter what you do, no matter where you go, is a finite capacity. It is not an infinitely expandable domain. And anyone who's worked in a network operator and has gone upstairs to ask for a purchase approval to expand the network and has had to go through the process of explaining the cost benefit, they know this pain. They know you have to go through it. The accountants want to know what will be the benefit of each incremental increase in the capacity. So you have to understand these differences. You have to understand the idea is to ensure the communications are treated fairly and transmitted to their source without interruption, without intervention, without problem. In terms of what's the issue here, sometimes we get a little bit confused in the discussions. The internet is not the main issue in many of these discussions. In many of the discussions, it's the information is the issue. They have been burning books since they started printing them to stop people getting the information. And it's the same with the internet. It's another way of distributing information which people who find it not in their interest to allow open information will try to interfere with. And I think we should pick up the point and definitely, in our evolution of the internet, try to ensure that we don't allow the information flow to be impeded. The last comment I would make would be that we have to understand, and I think the point about the critical analysis of what we do, we probably need some better mechanisms through our Twitters and our Facebooks and our social gatherings, and even through Google itself, to rate the information that's out there. Can we trust that information? Is it true? Is it not true? Because this is one of the, if you like, the gaps we're left with. We can get all this information, but we have no guidance as to whether other people believe it or trust it or can use it. And somehow I think that's perhaps one of the social things we need to add to our groups in the next era.
Thank you very much. And at this point, Mr. Vechovar, perhaps you'd like to elaborate a bit on the balance of profitability and enabling access that you so well touched upon in your introductory statement.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that is for us one of the critical questions for the future. How will we manage the growth? Actually, it's, as it was mentioned already, we have the same situation as majority of world service providers have. So this is growth with a explosive rate, so almost exponential in last years. And of course, I fully agree with Mr. Kennedy, that we have to distinguish what actually, and think about what information is actually. It's not everything in the same basket. So when we are talking about rich content, when we are talking about OTT, over-the-top providers, I think the only way is somehow to establish a cooperation between the network operators and those who are actually having so big profits actually today, like Google is. Google is coming with Google Television, Google TV. Actually, they have a clear wish to put all the environments, worldwide environments, everything for the same channel. So, but nothing will remain for the network operators who actually deliver this information. We have no wish actually to control the internet. We have no wish to somehow to not respect net neutrality, actually. But we just would like to survive, to have a sustainable business model. And I think that the information itself, it's not a problem. The problem is very rich content coming today, very, very rich, downloading and things like that, which has to be somehow respected, So if we can find a model to share this value from the content provider down to the access to the user, then we are maybe on the right way. And there was a news somewhere 1 month ago that biggest American operator AT&T and Google are start cooperating. I hope that this will not be in the way of diminishing net neutrality, but it will be in the way of cooperating and sharing actually the resources actually.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that respect in a way is becoming the underlying thought of this panel, and I think that's a good thing. I know the gentleman here on our right and his left had a question.
My name is Mario Hirsch. I come from Luxembourg, where I direct a think tank that has been put in place by 3 governments, French, German and Luxembourg government. We deal with European issues. Now, since I belong, after listening to André Nabergoy, to the hopelessly old-fashioned people who are being eliminated from things like this one, I would like to come out in support of the old media. Now, it has already been pointed out that the old media operate under much more stricter regulation than the new media. For good reasons. Because as we know, there are reasons why you have anti-libel rules for the press, because if you allow everything to be printed or to be distributed or broadcasted, you are offending people, and these people have a right to redress what has been said. Now the question is, of course, whether or not this model, regulatory model, can be extended to the new media. The answer is, of course, no, and that is pretty much what all of you have been saying. But nevertheless, I am a little frightened by what's going on, especially with the perspectives you have been drawing, and I am sure Mrs. Mijatovic is also frightened because now, if you compare your previous experience in the Bosnia and Herzegovina case with your new duties now, it can vary, and I'm sure you are confronted with situations where information is carried via internet on websites with the clear intent to provoke hate and things like that. So this, I suppose you will react to that, or you will at least take note of it and ask yourself, what can we do about this? Quite independent from the question, can we do something or not? So I would like to hear from your experience so far, which has been young, but I'm sure you have encountered situations like that.
Thank you very
How
much.
you would react.
Thank you very much for your question, certainly for Ms. Mijatovic, but also for Dr. Györkes, and at a legislative level, at the European level and the state level, I'd like to hear how the issues are being addressed, how the legislation is or isn't keeping, and then perhaps from the rest of the panelists as well, to how much privacy and protection are we entitled at a philosophical level in this day and age? As Mr. Kennedy has mentioned, the rules are different now, or rather the implied rules are different for newer generations than they were for us. So perhaps Ms. Mijatovic, Dr. Gyerkes, Mr. Kennedy.
I'll try to be brief. I don't think I'm frightened now at all. And I do not think we should be frightened of the threats that we see on the internet, because now they are even more exposed than we can imagine. Before, comparing it to, not to take too much time about the tragic history of my country and everything that happened there, but if there was a possibility to see it so clearly as we see it now, maybe, you know, all these things would not happen. The regulatory regimes, archaic control of broadcasting media are something that is completely unsustainable in new media, and I do not see that this can be an example in any way. But what we would do, and what I would note, as you mentioned rightly, if there is something on net inciting to hatred, violence, the issues that are not related to any kind of freedoms, but actually criminal offenses, the courts of the countries should deal with it. They should be the ones, but not the governments. Not the governments. Governments should not block the websites or take the websites down. It should go to the courts in a normal procedure, democratic procedure. But then again, we are talking about democratic regimes. We do not talk about state-controlled systems where you do not have those possibilities. So we would, again, need to work a lot with young people that are trying to reach us from certain countries. And I know that a colleague at the end knows more than I do what is happening in many parts of the world, like what happened in Iran when they managed to find a tool, the mechanism in order to reblock the websites that were blocked in Iran. So we can, you know, discuss it in many ways, but I think it's we live in a better era, to put it optimistically, because everything is more exposed. We see it more clearly with the new digital era and the internet. Before, we were not able to see it that way. So all those that are predators or all those that are a threat for our societies are more exposed, and we can fight them even more successfully than ever before.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Gyerkes, the archaic principles of control that are being applied, how realistic is it and how for them to change, and how quickly can they actually keep up with the changing world in your experience?
Okay, thank you for this question, but I'd like to reply to the question of the gentleman from Luxembourg. Actually, Mrs. Mijatovic answered the most of this challenge, but the regulatory model from the old media is already applied for new media. But there is one important gap. If you declare your blog or website as a media, if you do not declare it as a media, then it is not a media and it doesn't apply to the law. Yes, and that's this gap, of course. And I can fully agree, of course, that in democratic societies we have all the mechanisms that people and their opinions are protected. But we know how long is the way from the incident to the court and what can be the consequences. In early 2003, as regards the internet, there was convention on cybercrime adopted in almost all the European countries, and additional convention on hate speech and so on. And it was applied also in Slovenian law. But we can see a lot of hate speech on Slovenian pages also, under from anonymous authors. What to do with them? I think that it is not the answer, but it's just an observation that our sensitivity level to this incident is actually a moving target. And we can adapt even ourselves to that what is actually a hate speech and what is not. I don't say that it is good, that we should live with it, but the fact is that the sensitivity level of the individual is moving. And then I would like to reply to one observation of Mr. Kennedy. I think you opened the question of trust to the information. Maybe Mr. Turk has the same experience with his students, but I really try to avoid to allow quotations of Wikipedia and other untrusted sources. Even it is a bit controversial, because Wikipedia is one of the new sources of information, and so I encourage them to use the sources, even if these are e-sources, which are at the same editorial policy level like the conventional media. And the last issue I'd like to address, may I, is this one from the business, where I'm not very familiar. But I see that there are new distribution models which become worldwide. And I'd like to hear your opinion, may I, Andrei? And namely, just let me illustrate it with one example. I'm an occasional online shopper, and there is an offer also from Slovenian company to buy the same article, actually the same item, like from, let's say, Amazon or whatever. But I choose the second one for an unexplainable individual reason. And because it is bigger, I can trust it, I can buy more maybe. So the question is actually, what is the future of national or regional business models in the shop area of buying on the internet? So I answered with the question.
Thank you very much, and a big question at that, and that would require an extensive answer. If, Mr. Nabergoy, you could give a quick and succinct answer to that one, that would be wonderful. We have 2 more questions on this side, and then another from the lady, and another. So we have 4 more questions to get, and I'd like to have as many of them included as possible, please. Thank you.
Okay, so I think information wants to be free, and there is no way you can stop that. The Great Firewall of China employs over 10,000 people who are trying to filter content, manually and with some smart technologies. There's no way you can stop access to information in China. Still, millions and millions of people in China are accessing Google and Twitter and Facebook and all other services. So I think it's futile, as our colleagues observed before. So here comes the second part, and this is my favorite one. Yeah. Here's comes the second part. I think the internet infrastructure, the way the internet is built, is going to change fundamentally in the next 10 years. The web links that are, the fundamental tissue of the internet today are going to be replaced by different containers of content powered by Facebook. So it's already happening. Young people are hesitant to click on hyperlinks that are directed to an untrusted website that you don't know anything about, right? So what is happening instead is Facebook is now opening up their, link of data, the wealth of data to external websites and services to provide a very different experience to each and every one of us. So when I go to a website, I know this content is tailored to my interest, is filtered by my friends, is based on my previous and current behavior online, and this content is powered by Facebook. It's not a hyperlink anymore. We're talking about a very, very different internet, structure, and it's already happening. It's very, very early, but we're going to see that in the next 10 years. So in that case, there won't be the notion of millions and billions of websites around the world, which there still will be, but they won't be visible to you if you don't really want to go. And if you will go there, it means that some of your friends have pointed to that content. So you have, instead of a link that Google is indexing, you will have a connection. You have a reference point, another node in the graph, in the network, that will give you, trust that you, require to visit that content. So I think the internet is going to change fundamentally, and that will answer, all these questions pretty much in a very different way. What is, worrying me most, though, is that there's going to be a company at the center of it, and that is called Facebook. I think that they will try to own internet, right? It's already happening.
I know Mr. Kennedy had a quick response to that, and then we'll get to the other questions as we would like to include them all by the end of the panel. Thank you for your patience.
While I can't share my colleagues' allegiance with Facebook, I do actually believe the concept has been proven in society already. Whenever we feel threatened, we simply build a wall. There's a castle on the hill, has a lovely wall around it. In West Coast America at the moment, there's a number of residential areas that have a gate and a security guard, simply because when people feel threatened in an environment, they come up with some form of security. In the internet domain, it can be conceived as a virtual private network. So when you're in a situation where you have too much hostility or whatever, you can have this virtual private network. Now, the Facebook could be an instance of that. It could be some other way that you will create the community of trusted parties with whom you want to communicate. This could capture your point where you include the local suppliers of whatever and then do it. But it is a big problem because locality is only a concept when the service is something that you need to consume right now. When the delivery is already included, the locality is not that relevant in the selection of a purchase of that. So that is a threat to things.
Thank you very much for your answers. Gentleman in the third row, thank you.
Hi there, my name is Jeff Peel from Oxford Economics. We're an economics consultancy in the UK. Just a comment really on Andrei's point. While I recognise there are relatively few people in this room that are using social networking tools, and incidentally I am one of them, despite my approaching middle years, I think it's a little bit arrogant to suggest that people who aren't making use of social media are in some way fossilised, because obviously we all make extensive use of the internet. And those of us who book holidays and use Wikipedia and use all of the fabulous tools that are available to us should be enfranchised in the same way as people who make avid use of social media. So I think it's a wee bit arrogant. So I just want to make that and just introduce a degree of controversy into the discussion as well. But this I understood was a strategic conference, and I've heard very little about strategy here, and in particular how the internet is going to transform the process of government or governance. For example, nobody has made any reference to open data models. Nobody has made reference to the fact in many Western economies we're facing huge deficits, and the internet represents an opportunity to tear down the walls of government and to open up government data and allow individuals and entrepreneurs to start creating applications that government, quite frankly, are abjectly failing to do. We've seen, for example, in the United States, the emergence of the Sunshine Foundation, which is all about open data models so that the population can start making use of what data government has collected from the populace and the population has paid for through taxes. And surely that's the debate we should be having. That's the strategic debate we should be having about those people who are perhaps not the most intelligent in government, opening up the walls of data to the private sector and reducing the size of government through the use of internet tools.
Thank you very much. I think open governance, open government, e-government is certainly a subject that merits some discussion at this panel. Perhaps Dr. Turk would like to take that initially. And then, yes, gentleman in the fourth row.
I mean, there are plenty of strategic issues that need to be tackled because internet is disrupting them. I made a whole list here, but I did not go through them in my presentation. The first thing is that we are giving up our sequential lives. So in the past, in the industrial society, there was a period of education, then work, then retirement. In the society we're going into, this will all be in parallel. You would educate a little, you would be retired a little, and you would work a little all at the same time. In the industrial society, we would work within our country under local laws within a local social security system. In the coming society, we would work for everyone, everywhere. The whole world is a few clicks away. European Union is not an entity when it comes to the internet economy. You would have the mass media in the past. The gentleman was referring to that. In the past, the mass media was connecting society. It was gluing the society together. In the future, the niche media is actually fragmenting society. The long tail is fragmenting society rather than pulling it together. In the past, you would have mass education for mass production, for mass industrial production. In the future, you would have customized education for customized economy of customized services. In the past, you would have, or you did have, politics which was top of the pyramid, and I'm getting to the maybe e-governance issue. The pyramid, the top was very small 2,000 years ago. The top got bigger and bigger, but it was still the top of the pyramid paradigm. And in the internet society, you would have more of this governance of the type middle of the circle. And the last but not least, the thing, you would have social inequality versus social equality. And I think these are the big issues that the societies need to respond to. I mean, opening the archives, allowing business models to be built around government data, et cetera, et cetera. This is all something that has to be done, but it's niche, it's rather narrow, it's easy. What is difficult is to adapt these big things that the government are doing. Social security, international relations, intellectual property rights, how society is organized will change, and if societies will be too conservative about that, if the new media law would, pay so much attention to the old ways of doing things, if the retirement law would basically not acknowledge that, but still kind of pretend that we will have this industrial society for 200 more years. They are not doing it. And in an over-regulated society, you do not tend to give the freedom for the systems to self-adapt and to self-organize. And this is what I'm worried about. Maybe it was not a direct answer to your question, but these are some of the strategic problems that have to be solved on national levels and on the European level.
And on the one hand, it is a strategic question, but on the other hand, self-regulatory mechanisms are very much emerging from our discussion as well. And the net and the web and societies, particularly in these days, do in a way evolve themselves and set their own rules. Mr. Nabarko had a response, and I am aware we have at least 3 more questions in the audience. So,
yeah, very quickly. I think, again, the US is taking the lead with open government. I had a chance to meet the US CTO. They appointed a CTO, Anish Chopra, a couple of weeks ago, and he showed many examples of opening up their silos of data and making them available to external developers to do pretty much whatever they want with it. So he showed a couple of examples of an NGO, a team of 4 or 5 people who dug into their bulletin boards database of all laws and amendments and created a beautiful website which they can even monetize. And now the US government has adopted their website as their official bulletin board website. It's just opening up their data and making them available so that anyone can build services out of it. I think that is extremely revolutionary and showing again how the US can lead in opening up data and empowering citizens and organizations to tap into that wealth of data.
I have 2 eager Europeans to respond, I see, and because the questions are becoming more frequent and the answers as well, I'm loving the way that discussion is heating up, but it does mean we're going to need to abbreviate all forms of communication to get everybody in, so please.
I would also like to just take the question from Andreas from Zemanta, who is another successful Slovenian
the gentleman in
company.
The 4th row is waiting for the next question. Gentleman from Zemanta for the next question. We've got 1 in the back and 1 in the front as well.
May I?
Yes, Dr.
Yeah, just about open data models. From 2004, there is a directive on reuse of public sector information that makes all the information publicly available, and in almost all the EU countries there are. Maybe they are not so attractively presented like in the United States, I admit, but they are here and they can be used and reused.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah, one of the research issues we've actually got in the program of activities we're looking at the moment is how to understand within the data silos that we have in the various different sectors, how can we distinguish between generic information that could be through an open interface and private information. Simple example, healthcare. We could do a study that somebody had an operation. The knowledge of that individual's health scenario is totally private. However, The knowledge of the cure that was applied to the illness in this particular case could be of generic societal benefit. So it's being able to manage these data silos to distinguish between private information and generic societal benefit that could be made available through an open interface.
More than that, it's about self-management of data. An individual should have the right to manage their own data that's held by the state.
That's a second point of it.
That's a major barrier in terms of the true open data movement.
Yep.
Thank you very much for that, gentlemen. In the fourth row, please. Thank you for your patience.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Blaž Golob. I work for the Center for E-Governance Development for Southeast Europe. It is a public-private partnership by which it was designed by the governments what are the needs of information society development in Southeast Europe. And the model of 7 pillars were designed where they see the relevance and steps towards information society development. So let me just first express my gratitude for really great achievements and availabilities that ICT offers to individuals. Nevertheless, I would like to keep my freedom also to choose when I'm connected and when I'm not, and which connectivity I use. I think that's a major precondition also for the elderly, or I'm somewhere in between generation, I put this way. So the issue was addressed on e-government and governance, and already mentioned briefly. I think the sensitivity is about the information shared. And it was briefly mentioned the health. We know that nowadays in European Parliament and also the government struggle with, besides e-government, the e-health implementation. So, and the real issue is what strategies, which approach, what legal regulation, until which extent, and only at the end there are ICT solutions. Because ICT is an enabler, could provide a really great solutions. But for many, many information and access to information, it is very important the question of security, privacy, legal regulation, and of course, strategy. So I would just like to ask in this response.
Thank you. Again, I'll try to be very brief because I know that my time is limited, our time is limited. E-governments, e-voting, e-health, I mean, all E's that we have in the era of the internet can be tackled, you know, the same way. We should have those, you know, E's, but as I said, it is needless to say that there are threats, that, as you mentioned, privacy, your right to choose which provider, when are you connected, the way you access your internet. All those are different freedoms, but all those freedoms should be supported by certain regulatory and legal frameworks, but not anything that is, you know, more than what is allowed in a democratic society. I know it is very difficult to make distinction or to say this is, you know, the limit, or this should be done or should not be done. But there are standards, there are benchmarks, there are conventions, there are international declarations, there are documents that our countries adopted when they decided that they will be part of the democratic world. And all those benchmarks should be used when our governments are making certain laws. And that's why, you know, the role I have is when I see that the benchmark is crossed, to ring the bell or to alarm the certain government and go and talk to them in order to raise the issue of certain restrictions or restrictions of media pluralism or all those issues that we tackled upon today. But it is difficult to say what is allowed and what is not allowed. Our societies are different, and we should not become too obsessed in a way that we have different traditions, different cultures, different societies in order to restrict more. We should feel more free. Our governments should do more in order to enable citizens to access all this information, to learn how to use e-voting. You mentioned e-voting. That is something that we are trying to do now in Azerbaijan. And that is probably you know, a topic for another panel. On the other side, you have Turkey, that we are trying to talk to our government because of blockages of the websites, where you have more than 5,000 websites blocked for completely different reasons than, you know, blocking it for issues that are threats for a society. It is, you know, completely different topic. But again, I would like to end what Katerina said before, that no matter how much you restrict, the people will always find a way to access or to have freedoms that are denied to them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kennedy?
Yeah. You mentioned more e-numbers than the average packet of sweets, I think. Simple point. One of the common enablers for many of those services is identity. We need a consistent identity management system. If we have that, then we can enable a lot of things. It also, there's a lot of people hostile to having such a stringent identity management system because it means you're less anonymous than you were before and so on. But in order for e-government, I mean, in African states, when they're having elections, they put some indelible ink on the guy's hand so that you can see he doesn't come and try and vote again. We need similar controls if we're going to have e-elections. When it comes to the health, the issues I think at the moment are not so much the security issues, while they are key issues. Some of the basic things like consistent data models and metadata that would allow automatic translation, for example, of my health information into Slovenian if I had to visit a doctor in Slovenia and this type of thing. Work needs to be done on that pretty well immediately. Now, this is probably one of the most ambitious things, to try and have a consistent data model for medical information across God knows how many states. I mean, that is a frightening thought. First off, just in the how will I say, the technological exercise, but then in actually the political exercise of getting all those states to agree and so on. Terrifying. However, we have to work towards that way, and at least at some point in the next era, we should be able to have interoperable systems where such data can be translated and transferred.
Thank you very much. Zemanta.
Thank you. Hi, Andraž from Zemanta, Slovenian startup. I'd like to touch upon a point of intellectual property rights, which are one of the cornerstones of information society, of course. It seems that a bit hypocritical on one side that we're preaching freedom of press, we're open data government. On the other side, what we're seeing in certain industries is that the West is actually trying to appropriate intellectual property, trying to force their view of the regulation through secret negotiations to other countries to defend their territory, intellectual territory, of course. And the question is this a right approach, or should the internet also be understood that we should share more? We're usually most concerned of what we need to protect. And when we're protecting both from songs to patents, we forget what we lose by protecting that. What we lose that comes from the dissimulation of that knowledge. And we're trying to teach people that you can watch, but you can't touch. And what's up with that?
It's a fundamental issue of legislation, isn't it? The balance between protection and freedoms. And I think probably touches upon the subjects of each one of our panelists and might well be a nice topic to close upon if you all agree. So perhaps, again, starting from Mr. Nabergo in Silicon Valley, where obviously that particular regime is being imposed upon us, and moving on towards this side of the audience with just brief closing statements on this topic, if we may.
I think two technologies are fundamentally going to impact the way we treat IP. One of them is the new devices, new type of devices powered by app stores. What they call App Store is the way you buy applications and content for devices like the iPad or Android-based phones, where it is already possible now to accurately measure consumption of any kinds of content. So that brings in a monetization model, a business model that empowers anybody to manage IP rights properly. And companies like Apple are doing that, I think, in a very smart way, where you can buy a piece of content and then move it seamlessly across all your devices. That is something that I think is changing a little bit the way we treat IP. And the second one is cloud-based technologies, where you consume content, you don't own it, you consume it, and it's either usually what they call a freemium business model, where you consume it for free and then at some point you start paying for additional services or premium-based services. And for instance, in the music industry, there are companies that recently emerged extremely successfully across Europe and the US. One of them is called Spotify, and another one is called Grooveshark, that enable users to stream music, to listen to music for free. So users don't really care about IP and the way IP is managed in the back end with music producers and record labels. They should not care, right? They should listen to music. They want to have it free. They want to listen to music for free. They don't want to pay for it. The music industry has a huge challenge to recuperate those missing revenues, and they have to come up with new business models. So they've been trying to, the artists have to tour more, they have to sell more merchandise, they have to do more branded stuff, they have to do more other things, they have to do more apps, they have to do more games to recuperate and maybe even increase the revenue. But the way when people expect content for free, there's no way you can stop that. You can come up with a different business model. And I think technologies like cloud and tablet devices and app stores are making that possible. I mean, this is probably just touching the question very briefly.
Money will be made elsewhere, certainly, than in the past 20, 30 years. And again, moving back to the Darwinist theory, whoever adapts most quickly to the new paradigm and the new set of rules will succeed. Mr. Kennedy, you've elaborated relatively extensively already on privacy and intellectual privacy issues, e-government and health. Intellectual property rights, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, there's two particular dimensions we need to consider. One is the intellectual property of some content that's there to be consumed, music, video, or whatever. And there is a little bit of an issue here that the new generation, sorry guys, you're still too old, they don't understand the value of this. I mean, I have a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old daughter. They do not see any issue of taking the music on their phone and swapping it with the music on their friend's phone. They have no concept that this is any misappropriation of content or anything else. So your consumer domain do not understand the issue. Therefore, we need a different model to deal with that. Whether it's in that transfer, a token is sent and a central revenue of funds is used to pay for that additional consumption of the content or whatever, something like that. The second dimension of it is the actual mechanisms that are behind many of these services. Facebook mechanisms, Google mechanisms, all sorts of technology used to make things happen. Now that's where it becomes a different discussion, because there it's like the engineering of a car or something else. It's a proprietary product, which the product itself is not sold, the service of the product is sold. And then there's an interest in protecting your mechanisms with which you deliver that service. And that's quite difficult in these days, but most companies are doing it well. They protect their intellectual property via various security mechanisms. What will change are some of the models. The music industry has already learned. You can't charge 20 euros for a CD of music when the kids can swap an MP3 file in an email just like that. And they've got it down now. You can, I don't know what iTunes current rates are, but it's only cents for a track or whatever. And when they make the price at the level where it's not worth bypassing the security systems, then the market will work.
Thank you very much. Moving on from the music industry, and there have been analogies from Napster to WikiLeaks, recent example. The way the music industry dealt with Napster is supposedly the way that security forces are dealing with WikiLeaks. What have you got to say to that, Dr. Györkös, and how will legislative bodies deal with it?
Allow me not to comment WikiLeaks, please.
Sustained.
So there is a gap between generations and their understanding of intellectual property, like it was described. And of course, there are new models needed. So my answer to Samantha would be that from the side of the government, that Prime Minister has its group on information society. And one of the issues that was addressed, and is to be addressed in details, is our new models on intellectual property rights. And they are contributing also people who were well known from the civil society, from your past life. So I hope that there will be results, and that we can open some new perspectives in this demanding and area which is not limited to the borders of the country, of course. So let's see. Thank you.
Dr. Turk, how optimistic are you?
I think there's a need of change of the IPR policies. And going back to history again, one of the factors that made Europe great hundreds of years ago was also a system of the tangible property rights. It was not necessarily about being fair, it was about friendly to create new property. This is why communism failed. It focused on redistribution and not on creating. And the future IPR, the overhauled IPR, should have one single similar goal, not allowing to everything to be free, but stimulating, creating new property, whatever it takes to create more of the intellectual property. And if it does not sound fair, sorry, but those who will be creating more will be successful.
Bringing us back to General Powell's point of last night, it's all about creating wealth. Power
Yes.
ultimately is about creating wealth and communication and the freedom thereof. Ms. Mijatovic, perhaps a closing statement from yourself.
I will not comment on copyright and intellectual property, but I think we should recognize the legitimate right of rights of the governments to protect intellectual property and privacy and certain data. So it's not, that uncontrolled in a way, even though I really try not to use the word control, because the moment you say that you are controlling, I would rather say regulate certain issues, but not regulating free flow of information. And I would like to end with saying that if you restrict the access to information to your citizens, your chances to develop will become limited. Open up and try to introduce new ways of spreading the information, overcoming the culture of secrecy and using more transparency in order to reach your citizens. Your society will find ways to prosper. Thank you.
Yes, let's hope so. Mr. Vehovar, you enable all of this flow in a way, but at the same time you're asked to levy a sort of flat tax, shall we, if we may call it as such, in order to repay intellectual property rights across Europe. Please, let's have your views on that.
I have to stress that something else is coming, and this is called IP version 6, where all the connections could be encrypted, and this will change internet dramatically, because as Mr. Andrei said, I think internet will transform into something completely as it is today, and this might be threatening. I agree. More connections between machines, machine and machine in Web 3.0, more VPNs, closing societies. So it's hard to guess what will come out of that.
I think it's fair to leave it at that.
Yes.
I think it's fair to leave it at that. I'm delighted that there's been such a heated discussion and such participation from you, the audience. Thank you very much. I'd also like, obviously, to thank our panelists, Mr. Vehovar, Ms. Mijatovic, Dr. Turk, Dr. Györkös, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Nabergoy. Thank you very much for your kind engagement, and I think they all deserve a big hand. Thank you. We were the only thing between you and lunch, so bon appétit. Thank you very much.